The P-47 Thunderbolt, from joke to nightmare, April 8th, 1943, 27,000 feet over France. Lieutenant Ralph Hermichin couldn't help but smile as he watched the strange-looking planes climbing toward his German fighter group. The experienced pilot radioed to his wingman, laughing at the massive P-47 Thunderbolt struggling to gain height. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he joked. Below, 16 P-47s from the 4th Fighter Group climbed upward in tight formation. Their powerful engines pulled more than 7 tons of airplane through the thin air. To German pilots used to sleek Spitfires and quick Soviet fighters, these big Americans looked almost funny. Fat bodies under bubble canopies, wings that seemed too small, and huge propellers. What Hermichin didn't know, what none of the Germans could imagine, was that they were seeing a weapon that would completely destroy the German Air Force. Within 18 months, the milk bottles would go from a joke to a terror. The secret was already built into those wide wings, 8 machine guns. With about 3,400 bullets on board, firing at 6,000 rounds per minute, enough focused fire to tear an enemy fighter apart in 2 seconds. The battle began that very morning when Major Donald Blakesley saw the Germans forming to attack. A former ace who had flown British Spitfires, he understood what his new pilots didn't. In a P-47, you survive by forgetting everything you know about dogfighting. The Thunderbolt was completely different from the light. Quick fighters the Germans loved. It was a high-altitude beast that used weight, power, and firepower to change air combat forever. Among the 56 American pilots scattered across the French sky were men who would become legends. But on April 8th, 1943, they were inexperienced in an untested plane, facing the most battle-hardened fighter force in the world. The Germans had been at war since 1939, fighting in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans had exactly 0 days it. Combat. This is a story of American manufacturing beating German. Skill of building so many good planes that numbers became overwhelming, and of how German laughter turned to fear when they learned what 8 machine guns could do at 400 yards. The birth of a monster's. P-47 was born from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept through France, Republic's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, received urgent U.S. Army specs for a high-altitude fighter to match Germany's best. What he designed looked like a monster. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted, but a dinosaur with good shape. The first prototype flew on May 6, 1941, shocking everyone who saw it. Empty weight, 9,900 pounds, 65% heavier than earlier fighters. A massive turbo supercharger system ran through the rear, giving the plane a swollen look. Test pilots seeing it for the first time all asked, "Does this thing actually fly?" It did, and at high altitude it flew like nothing else. The R-2800 engine with 18 cylinders could hold full power at 27,000 feet, where German engines struggled. The exhaust-driven turbo gave sea-level performance in the thin air above, where regular superchargers failed. Not everyone loved it at first. Colonel Hub Zemke, training the 56th Fighter Group in Connecticut, initially hated the P-47. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit lost pilots to ground loops, torque roll on takeoff, and dives that introduced pilots violently to compressibility when shockwaves froze the controls. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in its early fights. But those who mastered it found something amazing. Lieutenant Robert Johnson described his first flight simply, like strapping yourself to a train engine. The power was unbelievable. First blood and hard lessons. The first battles in April and May 1943 confirmed every German belief. The P-47 couldn't turn with German fighters, couldn't climb well at medium heights, and felt clumsy. German pilots attacked from below, forced turning fights, and used every weakness. Joseph Priller reported after his first meeting that the new American fighter flew like a truck and climbed like a pregnant cow. The numbers seemed to prove him right. In the first month, Americans lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. British observers quietly suggested the US might want to switch planes. British jokes spread. The best way to escape in a P-47 was to unbuckle and run around the roomy cockpit. But German intelligence missed something important. Even the P-47s that went down had taken incredible punishment first. One plane returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun hits, damage that would have destroyed a German or British fighter. The air-cooled engine, without fragile coolant lines, could absorb hits that would stop a liquid-cooled engine instantly. And when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were devastating. The 8-gun setup created a cone of destruction unfamiliar to German pilots. Unlike their cannons with limited ammunition, the Thunderbolt could keep firing for 30 seconds, forever in a fight measured in heartbeats, the moment. Everything changed. The turning point began on June 26, 1943, near the French coast. Lieutenant Robert Johnson was with a formation of 48 P-47s returning from escort duty when 16 German fighters attacked from the sun. Johnson, flying last in formation, took the worst of it. Multiple 20-millimeter shells exploded across his plane. The canopy shattered. Fluid sprayed everywhere. The cowling tore away, and fire started behind the panel. Wounded in the face and leg, Johnson tried to bail out. But a shell had jammed the canopy. Trapped at 27,000 feet, with oil covering his windscreen and a shaking engine, he leveled out and pointed toward England. Then came the final test. A lone German fighter fell in behind the dying Thunderbolt and opened fire with everything. When the cannon ran dry, the German pulled alongside, stared, then fired again with what was left. Still it flew. Finally, the German pilot formed up, saluted, and flew away. Johnson landed with his engine dying. His crew chief stopped counting holes after 200. The story sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence refused to believe it, until multiple reports matched. The P-47 had taken everything and brought its pilot home. Learning to fight the right way. By July 1943, American pilots began using the Thunderbolt's real strengths. Zemke's rule was simple. Don't turn. Don't climb low. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. In a dive, nothing could catch a P-47. From 30,000 feet, it could reach 550 milliatoms, faster than any German fighter. That speed turned into a zoom climb that left enemies struggling below. Captain Bud Mahurin perfected the method. Climb high, roll upside down, dive on the enemy nearly straight down, then zoom back to altitude before they can respond. At the bottom, 8 machine guns fired in a solid wall of fire. Planes caught in that cone didn't just fall. They came apart. The scale of American firepower became clear during the August 17, 1943 raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Major David Schilling led his squadron down on German heavy fighters, forming to attack B-17 bombers. Surviving German gunners later described the Americans coming down like hammers. When the Thunderbolt fired, the plane ahead simply separated, wings, tail, crew compartment turning into pieces in 2 seconds. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 total, nearly 900 pounds of ammunition. 8 paths of bullets crossed in a 6-foot circle, delivering about 100 bullets per second. German pilots, used to short cannon bursts with limited ammunition, had never faced continuous heavy machine gun fire like this. Francis Gaby Gabreski put it simply. When all 8 guns hit, enemy fighters didn't go down, they exploded. The high-altitude advantage. By September 1943, the Germans learned a fresh horror. The P-47's performance got better with altitude, while theirs got worse. The turbo-supercharged engine held full power past 30,000 feet. German engines relying on mechanical superchargers struggled above 25,000 feet. On October 8, 1943, Ace Hans Philipp led a formation near 28,000 feet when Thunderbolts dove from above. In the thin air, his plane felt sluggish. The engine gasped for oxygen. Robert Johnson, now experienced, fired at 300 yards. Strikes along the body. Enemy plane exploded. No parachute. Philipp's death rattled the German Air Force. If one of their best couldn't survive, what chance did average pilots have? A report in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet. Its dive speed approached the speed of sound. Armor included 3 8-inch plate behind the pilot, 1 2-inch bullet-resistant glass, and heavy engine protection. Its tough construction allowed damage that would destroy several lighter fighters and still get home. The paddle prop revolution. In January of 1944, a new P-47 version completed the change from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-2223 arrived with a paddle blade propeller, 13 feet across with broad blades that bit the air like oars. Climb rate jumped from a week, 2,200 feet per minute to about 3,000 feet per minute, matching or beating German fighters at most heights. Speed improved too, letting Thunderbolts build energy faster in level flight. German diaries from early 1944 note the change. The fat Americans have learned to climb. The prop also changed the sound. Blade tips moving near supersonic speeds made a deep, threatening thunder that ground troops could hear from miles away. They called it a thunderclap. Going deep into Germany. By March 1944, Thunderbolts with extra fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. Standard loads carried 2 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, pushing range past 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade prop giving better performance even when heavy, P-47s could drop the tanks and immediately fight on equal terms. The German answer was to go for the bombers and hope to break the daylight bombing campaign. But that meant flying through an escort screen, grown thick and deadly. Günther Rau, one of Germany's leading aces, barely survived a March 6, 1944 battle badly wounded. He later recalled the Americans diving like an avalanche. 3 fighters destroyed in the first pass, and the constant stream of heavy fire that meant instant death if it touched you. Endurance gave the P-47 another edge. While German fighters burned fuel quickly at combat settings, the big engines could cruise efficiently at high altitude, allowing Thunderbolts to stay with the bombers for hours and still return with fuel to spare. Terror from the sky. Ground attack. When P-51 Mustangs took over most deep escort duty in spring 1944, P-47 groups shifted toward ground attack, becoming the most feared aircraft for German soldiers. The heavy machine gun battery chewed through trucks, trains, and thin-top armor. Adding bombs and rockets turned the Thunderbolt into flying artillery. The P-47 D-25 could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs, as much as early war medium bombers, and later versions fired up to 10 5-inch rockets, each essentially a 105mm artillery shell from the sky. Officers on the ground described columns simply stopping to exist in a single pass. The psychological effect was devastating. Troops called them JBOs, fighter bombers, but the Thunderbolt felt like something more. D-Day and air supremacy, June 6, 1944, D-Day. Over 500 P-47s stacked from sea level to high altitude made an umbrella the German Air Force couldn't pierce. Of the few German pilots who reached the beaches, most didn't make it back. Reports spoke of an American sky, of Thunderbolts waiting at every height. In the weeks after, daytime movement became suicide. P-47s claimed hundreds of trains, thousands of trucks, tanks, and horse-drawn vehicles. The German army moved by night, or didn't move at all. Meanwhile, the Thunderbolt proved itself in the Pacific. The 348th Fighter Group found it perfectly suited to long distances and rough fields. Japanese pilots, used to quick but fragile opponents, were stunned by the P-47's toughness and firepower. The P-47N, built for the Pacific, carried extra fuel and stretched range toward 2,150 miles, escorting B-29 bombers to Japan. The short-ranged bruiser of 1943 had become a long-range heavyweight. Even jets couldn't save them. Even Germany's jets didn't end the Thunderbolt's usefulness. The Me-262, at about 540 mph, should have been untouchable. But Thunderbolts learned to catch jets, taking off or landing, and sometimes in steep dives from altitude. Late-war P-47M versions, with water methanol injection and cleaner aerodynamics, reached 470 mph at height and hunted V-1 flying bombs and jets. Pilots learned another truth about jets. They were fast, but they couldn't take hits. One clean burst from 8 machine guns often tore them apart. The final gamble. On January 1, 1945, the German Air Force gambled everything on Operation Bodenplatte, a massive surprise attack on Allied airfields. Nearly 900 German fighters swept in low. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, the first minutes were chaos. 22 Thunderbolts destroyed on the ground. A captured German pilot sneered at the burning wrecks. The American answer pointed to ground crews already clearing debris. Tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long to replace your pilots? Within 48 hours, the flight line filled with factory-fresh P-47s flown from England. The Germans lost hundreds of aircraft and over 200 pilots, losses they couldn't replace. The Americans replaced theirs within a week. The numbers tell the story. The numbers told the larger truth. Republic Aviation built roughly 15,683 P-47s, more than any other U.S. fighter. At peak production, factories rolled out nearly 1 per hour. Each plane needed 65,000 parts, 8 miles of wire, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, 300 pounds of rubber. More important was training. By 1944, America graduated tens of thousands of pilots every year. A P-47 pilot often arrived with 400 hours of flight time, including 100 hours in advanced fighters, gunnery practice, and instrument work. Many late-war German replacements had under 100 hours total. In combat, that gap showed. From laughter to fear, German attitudes changed from mockery to grim respect. Reports from 1943 called the P-47 large, slow to turn, a small threat except in dives. By December 1943, reports flagged exceptional high-altitude performance and extreme toughness. By June 1944, the P-47 was the dominant fighter bomber. By March 1945, some reports said direct combat was impossible to survive. After the war, even famous German pilots admitted the mistake. The Americans hadn't built a European dogfighter. They'd built an American one, designed around mass production, survivability, firepower, and altitude. The first time German veterans flew a captured Thunderbolt, they understood the power, the visibility, the comfortable cockpit, the precise controls wrapped in armor, and the thought that America built over 15,000 of these while fighting everywhere. The Germans had laughed in 1943. By 1945, there were few left to laugh. Built to last, the engineering matched the philosophy. Parts were overbuilt and backed up. Wing supports could carry 40,000 pounds. The engine mount was rated for heavy loads. Control cables were doubled. Gun heaters prevented freezing. Each gun could be charged and cleared individually. Critics later argued that the P-47 won by quantity, not quality, that German fighters were technically better, but drowned by numbers. Combat film tells a different story. In equal number fights, Thunderbolts often won. The heavy machine gun battery, dismissed as weaker than cannon, proved devastating because it was accurate, plentiful, and sustained. German 20mm shells were individually powerful, but few. 150 caliber belts created a cloud of probability that guaranteed multiple hits in a 2-second burst. The legacy. The P-47 remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight exceeded the full weight of some twin-engine planes. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war. Its guns delivered more fire than a platoon of soldiers. And yet it was built by the thousands, flown by men barely out of school, and maintained by crews who learned their job in weeks. The change in German opinion, from laughter to fear, took less than 2 years. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet fighters without fear spoke of the Thunderbolt in hushed tones decades later. At the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, a restored P-47D stands among legends. The real story sits in a small case, a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 breaking apart under fire, and spent .50 caliber shells lying dull and heavy. A line from a 1945 interrogation captures the change. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly fighters that couldn't turn or climb. We stopped laughing when we learned they didn't have to. They just pointed those guns, and you ceased to exist." The P-47 entered combat as a joke and ended as a weapon of destruction. Between those points, 8 synchronized machine guns rewrote the rules and buried the German Air Force under an avalanche of lead. German pilots laughed at the clumsy American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were almost no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.